So I've done a couple of reviews lately where I've talked about the remixing work that's been done by Stephen W. Taylor, in particular his remixes on the recent box sets by Vandergraaf Generator and Camel, both of which I found quite enjoyable, right? The Vandergraaf work lent a number of passages a new sense of depth, sonic richness, while the Camel material had just kind of a level of punch and intensity that the original mixes didn't. And in the Camel review, I talked about the combination of newness and familiarity that these new stereo mixes create, right? The way they provide the chance to hear a deeply familiar thing in a new way. And I recently had the chance to check out the 50th anniversary box set of Nektar's Remember the Future, which includes both a remaster and a new stereo mix, this time by Ben Wiseman. And so I thought it would be interesting to hear what Wiseman did with this album. Now, Remember the Future doesn't really need an introduction, I think. It's usually regarded as Nektar's high-water mark, the point where they found the best balance of progressive structure with melody and accessibility, and I think even a touch of almost kind of a funkiness that gives it an energy and a sprightly quality that very little else from the prog movement achieves. Now, I love Nektar. I have their first 4 albums on CD in the collection. I've listened to them with some regularity for the last 15 years, but I will say that I don't know them with quite the same level of depth that I do Vandergraaf Generator or Camel, right? You know, with those two bands, I really kind of, know every detail of the music in my bones, and well enough that I can pick up small variations and changes without really even needing to compare them side by side. I really don't know Nektar in quite so granular a detail. But that being said, let's check out a few examples of what Wiseman's remix here is doing. Here's a bit from relatively early in track 1. So that's a nice change, right? The new version has kind of a warm, enveloping quality, makes the original feel a bit muffled by comparison. The organ in particular on this new mix has this kind of warm blanket quality. It's really something you can relax into. Now, the original production, the original mix on this album, those were actually really very good by the standards of their time. They've aged really well, but there's still a noticeable improvement here in the depth of the sound. Another way that this new mix benefits is in the intensity of the heavy parts. Let's compare a louder section from near the middle of track 1. Now that's quite a big difference, right? The sound is all around fuller, stronger. The cymbal in particular has way more presence, a sharper sound that cuts harder than before. Really brings out the dynamic in the music, right? The contrast between that harmony section and the heavy guitar to where that transition hits with more force. Check out the differences in this guitar solo from later in track 1. The guitar solo there really stands out from the mix quite a bit more. It really kind of soars, feels on headphones almost like it's moving around inside your head. There's much more visual and imaginative space that's created in the music. Listen to the low, distorted guitar in this section from part 2. So that kind of low-end dun 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 dun, that section, or that bit, right, that detail feels thicker and richer, and it lends some menace, I think, to that passage that works really well at setting a mood. I haven't focused too much on the vocals so far, and that wasn't something I thought about as much listening to the new version and listening to some bits side by side, but do pay attention to how the mix is treating the lead vocal in this section. There's an effect in the old mix where the final syllable in the word sympathy almost feels kind of buried, right? Probably just because the voice is overall a bit lower in the mix and the singer is at the end of a breath there, right? The new mix, overall the instrumental dynamic there is fuller and richer, but at the same time, you can hear that whole word when he sings it. So overall, I think this is a little bit of a conservative remix compared to some of the others that I've talked about, in the sense that, It's not really bringing your attention to a new part or changing the listener's focus in terms of which aspects of the music you're paying attention to. It's not really changing where the spotlight is for the most part. But what it is doing is, I think, exactly what you'd hope with this kind of set, which is to add a little bit of power, some depth, some space to the sound without really changing the soul of the music at all. Now, the changes in remastering are usually a bit less obvious than changes in mix, right? So with any kind of set like this, personally, just in terms of my own taste, my interest is more in the remixed version. But of course, this does include a new remaster as well, and that's always an interesting comparison to make. Also, particularly for people who are a little bit more purist about listening to the original mix and maybe just want the best master they can get of the original mix. Now, I'll be honest here and say that I'm not super familiar with the release history of this album, but there doesn't really seem to be a commonly available default version. You know, looking at the eBay listings, there are quite a lot of different versions from different labels. There's a single disc digipack version on Purple Pyramid, an SACD version from 2004, a version from WHD Entertainment with an Obi, a version on Basilisk Records from 1987, a 2007 release on Bellephon, a 2007 release on Dream Nebula. Now, my own copy is the Purple Pyramid release, but it's in a jewel case as opposed to the one on eBay in a digipack, and it comes with a live bonus disc. That wasn't a particular choice on my part. It just happened to be what was available at the time that I decided to purchase a CD copy of the early Nektar albums. I'm going to guess all these releases probably sound about the same, of course, aside from the SACD, but I don't really know that for sure. That's just a supposition. I do know that I've never been bothered by the master on the copy that I have. It's always sounded perfectly good to me and you know, fine for everyday listening. But that is what I'll be using to compare the remaster here, the 2014 Purple Pyramid 2-disc version. So I'll just play a couple of different passages between my older release and the remaster from the 50th anniversary set of the original mix. So this is a really good remaster, I think. You know, you can see from looking visually at the file that it's not overinflated, right? It has a lot of dynamic variation, has a lot of space, but when it wants to be loud, it can be quite thick and full, and it has a really pretty good bass in particular. You know, honestly, the remix here is so good while also being so faithful to the texture and spirit of the original that I'll probably come back to that more often than I come back to the remaster. But if you're a purist about mixes or you just kind of prefer to hear it in the more familiar version, I think Wiseman's really done an excellent job on the remaster here as well. In terms of live material, this release includes 2 live discs from the Stadthalle in 1974. That's actually a different date than the live material that I have on the Purple Pyramid release. I'm honestly not familiar enough with the whole history of Nektar live material to know if this is the first time that this has come to light, this particular concert. But it's a generous helping of live material. It should help make it worth what is admittedly a relatively high price for a set that does just contain 1 album. Now, in the Camel video, a couple people noted that I didn't mention the 5.1 surround mixes, that would add a different value proposition for buyers of the box if they're fond of 5.1. You know, that's a fair criticism. Ultimately, what makes these videos interesting, I think, is the ability to listen to bits side by side, right? And I can't really do that with surround. I have a surround setup. I have a 5.1 setup. I do listen to things in surround sometimes, but, you know, I can't really speak to that with... I'm not somebody who knows surround well enough to really kind of enthusiastically distinguish between a more and less effective 5.1 mix. And, you know, honestly, when I listen to things, it's much more often either at the office or on headphones while I'm moving around the house. Maybe that's, you know, not ideal, but that's what I have available for time, right? So it's rare that I get the chance to really sit down and listen to something in 5.1 to really immerse myself in a surround mix. for better or worse, it's not something I do as much as I'd like to. And, I usually don't talk about that too much in the videos because it's not really something that I can convey. If you are a fan of 5.1 mixes, this does include that, of course. And it may be, I think, the thing that makes the whole purchase worthwhile for some people who are enthusiastic about that format. I'm just not somebody that consumes music that way as often as some people do. So if you are able to swing the cost of this set, it is a great way to hear this album. It is probably the best master of it available, and a remix that I think adds enough to really kind of bring some new depth to the music while really kind of leaving the core of it as you remember, right? So a great opportunity to immerse yourself in one of the less commonly discussed masterpieces of the high prog era. Recommended if you're into Nektar and you have $60 to spend. Thanks everybody for listening, and I'll see you all next week.